You'd have to have been living under a rock if you hadn't heard about the Google Pixel 6 Pro. It's Google's latest phone that came out late October, and, well, it's caused quite a lot of hype because, along with its smaller sibling, the Pixel 6, it features Google's own custom Tensor chip, rather than the usual Qualcomm chip like many other Android phones use. Now, after many years of using various Qualcomms of sorts, Google are now taking a page out of Apple's book and making their own chips in-house. So why have they done this? Well, they wanted something that handles all of their fancy schmancy machine learning gubbins, better than anything else on the market. But I'm not interested in that. Oh no. I want to see how well this plays games, because, well, that's all we're interested in here, isn't it? Now, I'm one of the lucky sods who was able to get a hold of a Pixel 6 Pro, since an awful lot of people's pre-orders aren't even going to be delivered until sometime in 2022. So I feel it's my responsibility, nay, my duty, to show you all how it performs when it comes to playing games. Anything from popular mobile titles to retro game emulation. So hello fellow gamers, and what is gaming like on Google's latest flagship? Now, just to be clear, I'm not going into a review of the Pixel 6 Pro as a whole. This ain't the channel for that. If you want a review, check out, I don't know, MKBHD or something. Now, we want to see how well this latest flagship from Google can play video games. But, look at this. It's another phone. Not only that, it's my old phone. This is a Pixel 2 XL. I've had it since, I think it was around about November of 2017. So about 4 years I've been using this as my main everyday phone. And you know what? It's been great. I even thought it worked really well when it came to playing video games. But we're here for the Pixel 6 Pro, the latest flagship. We want to see how games play on that. But I thought it would be fun to compare it to one of Google's own offerings from only a few years ago. And you know what? I think something like this would be quite handy for anyone who's upgrading after such a long time. Okay, so firstly, let's cover a small handful of popular mobile games. Now, you will be happy to know that the titles listed on the screen right now will not feature in this video. Put simply, they are utter tripe, they are an affront to video gaming as a whole, and our lives will be a lot better without them. So, now that I've thrown out several £1,000s worth of potential sponsorship out the window, let's check out the Pixel 6 Pro. Okay, now the first game I wanted to cover here is, well, of course, Pokemon Go. I have to admit, I play this game, I play this game on and off. It is the game that I play the most often on a mobile phone. Now granted, yeah, I'm not a pro at it, but I'd like to think that I've played it enough that I know all of the ins and outs of it. And I like to think I've played it enough so I can tell the difference between my old phone and the new one. Now straight away I noticed that everything is noticeably faster and smoother, just absolutely everywhere. When you're in battles, when you're walking around, when you're browsing the menus, just everything is a lot smoother. Now of course this has something to do with the 6 Pro's 120Hz screen as opposed to the 2XL's 60Hz screen. But what I find is that the refresh rate on the older phone, on the 2XL, is a little lower. It's more like 30 frames per second rather than taking full advantage of the screen refresh rate. Maybe it's just not powerful enough to do it. Now you're probably not noticing much of a difference on the screen recordings here. What I've done is I've used the screen recording features available on both of my phones because they're on Androids 11 and 12, so they both have screen recording built in to the OS. And it's quite difficult to tell the difference between these two on the screen recordings alone. You really have to see it with your own eyes using the phone's displays themselves. And when you do that, which is really what you're going to be doing anyway, the 6 Pro is easily smoother, faster, better than the 2XL. Now next up on the list is Asphalt 9. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking, this probably should have been added to the list of games that I don't care about from just earlier, because it's pretty much a shell of a racing game, and it has the same microtransactions problem as many other mobile games. But even I have to admit that Gameloft have done a really nice job with the graphics in the Asphalt series, given that this title has to support, many different devices. From my experience anyway with both of these pixels, they've clearly optimized the graphics really well. Gameplay wise, it's very much a damp squib, but graphically, I doff my hat to them. Now when it came to playing these games on my two pixels, I didn't really notice any difference until I started comparing the recordings. But when you do that, the Pixel 6 Pro runs an awful lot smoother. But you know what, playing the game on the 2XL, it was fine. It was perfectly fine, even with the slightly lower frame rate. The one thing I did notice when I was comparing the two was that the load times on the 6 Pro was an awful lot faster than on the 2XL. We're talking 10 seconds less loading time between races. But again, that was something that I didn't notice until I did a direct comparison. So yeah, again, and to no one's surprise, it runs better on the newer phone than it does on the older phone. But you know what? I am quite impressed with the quality of the graphics on the 2XL. I'm very impressed with how well that's been maintained, especially considering there's several years difference between these two. Now the last mobile game I want to cover here is Call of Duty Mobile. Now again, I'm sure a few people are going to want me to have added that to the exclusion list from earlier. And I kind of wanted to add it on there as well because, well, I'm not a fan of Call of Duty. I know, shock horror, I'm going to get a lot of hate for that, it's just my opinion. But I know a lot of people like it, so it's probably worth covering. Now with COD, the same applies here as it does with Asphalt 9. It does work really well on both of these phones, even though there's like a 4-year gap between them. COD Mobile has the option to use high definition textures, and I went ahead and used that for both of these for a fair comparison. And when it came to loading in a session, well, they both loaded them in good time. There was a very slight delay in loading in the textures and the assets on the 2XL, and overall the performance on the 6 Pro was a little bit more smooth. But to be honest, the performance of the game on both phones was pretty much the same other than those couple of little bits. So clearly there's been some really good optimization done in the game in order to make it work well on both of these phones. I suppose that's something you have to do when it comes to developing mobile games. If you support as many phones as possible, it means that you're going to be able to get more money out of more people via microtransactions. So the results are pretty clear when comparing mobile games on the two pixels. The Pixel 6 Pro does play the games better every time, but I suppose you really need that immediate context to see a lot of the differences. You'd have to have seen these games on a previous phone model in order to say with absolute certainty, yes, this definitely plays better. But without this context, you know what? Even a phone from 4 years ago will work just fine and it will perform well. So with mobile games alone, is the difference worth another 850 quid at least? Absolutely not. But hopefully you're going to be using your phone for a lot more than just playing mobile games anyway. Such as playing emulated console games. Now here's where things get interesting. I won't be covering anything from the 16-bit era or below, like the SNES or the Mega Drive or earlier than that, because they work pretty much on everything anyway. Instead, I try out a handful of games from the 5th and 6th generation that often throw curveballs when it comes to emulation. What better way of testing out the emulation on these two phones by pitting them against each other with an N64 emulation of Super Smash Bros. Now I'm using the same emulator on both of these phones. I'm using the Mupin 64 Plus FZ emulator. I'm running the same ROM and I'm running them both at the same settings. And one thing that I noticed was that the Pixel 6 Pro had noticeably faster loading times between battles. But besides that, otherwise they both performed pretty much the same. They were both sharp, they were both smooth, the battles had very little lag in them. It was very fun to play on both of the phones. They both even suffered from the same problems because they both had the usual delay between major transitions, like major scenes, like what you'd find on the intro animation. But beyond that, there's very little between them. Another N64 game that I hear is pretty hard to emulate is Perfect Dark. This is Rare's spiritual sequel to GoldenEye 007. And hey, anyone who's played the N64 original will know that it struggled even on the original system. So what's it going to be like on emulation, especially on a mobile device? Well, I would say in general they both performed pretty darn well. The Pixel 6 Pro had marginally faster loading between scenes, and it didn't pause on transitions between major scenes like the 2 XL did. But what's strange here is that when you compare the two screen recordings, the Pixel 2 XL is showing that the graphics are quite a bit sharper compared to the 6 Pro. But at the same time, we're dealing with two mobile devices here. Both have relatively small screens compared to, well, the size of a screen you'd normally play an N64 game on anyway. During normal gameplay, this was not noticeable at all. Okay, let's move on from the N64 and cover its successor, the GameCube. And I couldn't think of a better game to start off with than Mario Kart Double Dash. Now, in short, both of the phones ran the game extremely well. But when I was doing my comparisons, I noticed that the 2XL was stuttering an awful lot. It was really bad. Trying to play the game, it was extremely slow. But after a bit of trial and error, I soon realised that it was because I was recording the screen. I was recording the screen on both of these phones while I was trying out these games, and it obviously had a negative impact on the 2XL. So what I've had to do is I've had to turn that off in order to give you a proper comparison between the two. I suppose that shows how the internal memory on the 6 Pro reads and writes a lot faster than the 2XL. But anyway, with the screen recording turned off, the performance of the two were more or less the same. The loading times were no faster on the newer phone, and the games ran very smoothly on both of them. Now the next game which I hear is hard to emulate is Metroid Prime. And straight away, even when I wasn't recording the screens on both of these phones, the 6 Pro emulated the game a lot better than the 2XL. Because the older phone, it was jittering all the time, it was laggy, and it was running at a lower frame rate. I thought that might have had something to do with the screen recording like it was with Mario Kart. So when I turned that off and I tried again, the performance was exactly the same. It was pretty damn poor. Whereas on the 6 Pro, it ran a damn sight better, and at a higher resolution as well. Alright, let's steer away from Nintendo now and focus on the Sega Saturn. On both of these phones I used the Yaba Shenshiro 2 emulator in order to emulate the games, and the first one I thought of trying out was Sega Rally. Now I got some pretty interesting results from this, but it might not be what you're expecting. Graphics wise, they both looked exactly the same. The quality of all of the polygons and the textures and everything, they were super sharp and super crisp, and everything looked absolutely gorgeous for the time. But what I found strange was that the game played slower than normal on the 2XL, but it ran a lot faster on the 6 Pro. Now at first I thought this was the same issue that I had with the GameCube, because of the screen recording. But when I switched it off, it was exactly the same. So yeah, that was a bit strange. Otherwise they performed the same, although I think I would prefer the 6 Pro, because it ran smoother as a result. But yeah, to be honest, neither of them were accurate. So for the next Saturn game, I thought I'd try out another classic, Virtua Fighter. And I've got to be honest, it was the same issue here. On the 2XL, it was running far too slow, and on the 6 Pro, it was running far too fast. Now when I was comparing the two, I thought maybe that the 2XL couldn't handle the upscaled resolution, so I knocked it back down to the original resolution, but it was still exactly the same. On the 2XL, it was just absolutely awful to play. It was jittering all the time and it was way too slow. Now granted, on the 6 Pro it was too fast, but at least it ran smoothly. I don't know, maybe I need to tweak a few of the settings in the emulator in order to sort this out. If you've experienced the same issue, let me know in the comments down below. I would like to get this sorted. Okay, we're going to finish off our emulation tests by trying out emulating the Dreamcast. On both of my phones I used the same emulator again. I used Redream on both of them and I left them on the default settings. It's the free version which doesn't upscale the graphics. Instead it outputs everything at the game's native resolution. And you know what? It seems that we've gone full circle here. Now when we try to pit these two together trying to emulate Sonic Adventure, graphically it's the same on both of them. They both ran incredibly smooth and the loading times were no different between them either. Not to mention there was no issue with recording the screen. The older 2XL had no problem with it. Now at this stage I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if there's simply more love for the Dreamcast, so people are putting in more effort in order to emulate the games from that system better, or whether it has something to do with the architecture of the original system. Maybe it's easier to port it to other systems or to emulate the games properly. But regardless, Sonic Adventure, it ran perfectly fine on both of these phones. So okay, Sonic Adventure worked perfectly fine on both of the phones, so I thought I'd push it a little bit by trying to emulate Hydro Thunder. Now this game originally would not work properly if you are using like a VGA output cable on your original Dreamcast, so I thought that requirement might have been a bit of a curveball when it came to emulating this on a phone. Well, no, it wasn't. It runs exactly the same on the 6 Pro and on the 2XL. There are absolutely no differences between the two. The loading times were the same, the graphics were the same, the resolution was the same, and they both ran very smoothly. You honestly couldn't tell the difference here. So yeah, if you want to play Dreamcast games on a mobile device, it doesn't matter if you've got a phone that's several years old. It's going to run it fine. So yeah, there's no contest here. The Pixel 6 Pro is a huge step up from the old Pixel 2 XL from 4 years ago. Now granted, it did hit the odd snag and it still had some performance issues between major transitions and some cutscenes, but the 6 Pro has shown me that, I feel anyway, that we've finally reached a point where retro 3D game emulation across so many different platforms is now actually a viable option on a mobile device. So am I going to start playing emulated games on my phone now? Well, maybe. I mean, I've seen with my own eyes how well it works, so it's definitely a viable option. But the thing is, I want to keep that space free for everything else on my phone. So I don't know, I might keep a few ROMs on there just to pass the time whenever I'm bored, because I know they're going to work pretty darn well. But with that, I'm signing off, so thanks very much for watching. Have you been lucky enough to get hold of a Pixel 6 or a 6 Pro at launch? And have you been trying out games on it? Or maybe you've got one pre-ordered and you want to play a lot of games on it. Let everyone know down below in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, there's always that subscribe button if you want to hear more from me. Thanks again for watching, please leave a like if you liked the video, and I'll catch you all next time.